It's 2019, right on the cusp of a new decade, in a quiet, picturesque suburban neighborhood. You'd almost think you've walked straight into a postcard. Maple trees lining the streets, all the houses nearly identical, with neatly trimmed lawns. It's the kind of place where neighbors greet each other by name, parents share carpool schedules, and everyone knows everyone's business. Or at least they think they do. Mark lives here. He's a classic nice guy, in every sense of the word. Mid-30s, sharp dresser, usually found in button-downs even on the weekends, and well-liked by nearly everyone he meets. He's got a quiet charm, the kind that doesn't demand attention but gets it anyway. People respect him because he listens more than he talks and has this reassuring presence that makes you feel like everything's going to be okay. He's the type of guy who'd offer to help you change a flat tire, even if it meant he'd be late to his own dinner. Mark's married to Sarah, his college sweetheart. They've been together for over a decade now. Sarah's the outgoing one of the pair, always ready to host a neighborhood barbecue or volunteer at their kids' school. While Mark tends to fade into the background at social gatherings, Sarah's usually at the center of it all, laughing loudly, telling stories, keeping everyone entertained. Together, they balance each other out, at least on the surface. But beneath that perfect facade, there's a tension, subtle but present. Their marriage, while appearing solid to anyone else, has been slowly wearing thin. It's the little things, the small, barely noticeable moments that start to pile up over the years. Maybe it's the way Sarah sighs a bit too loudly when Mark forgets to take out the trash, or how Mark spends a little too much time at work, coming home just late enough to miss dinner with the family. They don't argue, not exactly, but there's a coolness between them that wasn't there in the beginning. Mark works as an account manager at a mid-sized tech firm. It's not the most exciting job in the world, but it's stable and he's good at it. His coworkers appreciate his easygoing nature, and his boss sees him as dependable, someone who can be counted on to handle things without much fuss. He's the guy who stays late to finish a project if it means everyone else can go home early. Lately, though, he's found himself taking on more than he needs to, volunteering for tasks that keep him away from home longer than usual. Maybe it's because of the new hire, someone who's made those late nights a bit more bearable. Enter Claire. She joined the company a few months back, right out of college, bright, ambitious, and eager to make a name for herself. She's got this energy that's hard to ignore, like she's genuinely excited about every new challenge. Unlike Mark, who's become a bit jaded by the corporate grind, Claire's still got that spark, that drive. She's the kind of person who stays up late to watch tutorials on how to get better at her job, then shows up the next day with new ideas, fresh perspectives. And Mark, well, he finds himself gravitating toward her enthusiasm. It's refreshing, a reminder of the person he used to be before life started feeling like a routine. At first, it's all professional. They're working on the same project, a new client with big expectations, so they spend a lot of time together, brainstorming, going over reports, strategizing. Claire looks up to Mark, sees him as a mentor, and he enjoys guiding her, showing her the ropes. She's a quick learner, picking up on things he never had the chance to master so early in his career. They make a good team, and their work reflects it. The project is a success, and their boss takes notice, even hints that a promotion could be in Mark's future. But as they spend more time together, the lines between professional and personal start to blur. There's a moment after a late-night work session when Claire laughs at one of Mark's terrible jokes. One that Sarah would probably just roll her eyes at. She doesn't just laugh. She genuinely finds it funny, and for the first time in a while, Mark feels seen, appreciated. It's a small thing, but it hits him harder than he expected. He starts looking forward to these late nights, lingering just a little longer in Claire's office after everyone else has left. They talk about work, sure, but also about life, dreams, regrets. Claire tells him about her aspirations, the things she wants to accomplish, and he finds himself opening up too, sharing stories he'd long buried, ambitions he'd given up on. There's a connection growing, one that neither of them acknowledges out loud but both of them feel. Back at home, things with Sarah continue as usual, at least on the surface. They go through the motions, dinner with the kids, weekend errands, family movie nights. But Mark's mind is often elsewhere. He catches himself thinking about Claire in the middle of conversations, zoning out just for a second too long. Sarah notices, but she doesn't say anything, maybe because she doesn't want to believe there's anything to worry about. One night, as Mark is getting ready to leave the office, Claire asks him if he'd like to grab a drink. It's just a casual offer, a way to unwind after a stressful week. But Mark hesitates. He knows that going out with her, even just for a drink, feels like crossing a line. Yet, he finds himself agreeing, telling himself it's harmless, that it's just a drink between colleagues. They end up at a quiet bar downtown, one of those places with dim lighting and soft music, where it feels easy to talk about things you wouldn't normally share. They order drinks, chat about the project, laugh about their boss's quirks. And then, somewhere between the second and third round, the conversation takes a more personal turn. Claire talks about her childhood, her family, the things she struggled with, and Mark listens, genuinely interested, feeling a pull toward her vulnerability. When Claire places her hand on his arm, just for a moment, it feels electric. He's startled by how much he wants to reach out, to take her hand in his, but he resists. They both know it's inappropriate, that it crosses a boundary. Yet, neither of them pulls away. Back home, Sarah is waiting, unaware of the storm brewing just beneath the surface. She's noticed the subtle changes in Mark, the slight distance, the way he's been more absorbed in his work lately. But she tells herself it's just stress, that they'll get through it like they always have. She doesn't know about Claire, doesn't know that her husband is standing on the edge of a decision that could shatter the life they've built together. The night ends with Mark dropping Claire off at her apartment. They share a lingering glance, both aware of the unspoken tension between them, but neither says a word. As Mark drives home, he feels a mix of guilt and excitement, conflicted but unable to shake the memory of her laughter. Her hand on his arm, Mark's mind is still spinning after dropping Claire off. That evening, he goes home to Sarah, but his thoughts keep drifting back to the bar. That small touch on his arm had meant more than it should have. Mark is fighting a losing battle with himself, trying to convince his heart that what happened was innocent, just a casual outing between colleagues. But deep down, he knows that's not entirely true. Over the next few days, Mark throws himself back into work, hoping to squash the feelings that are beginning to surface. He starts coming home even later, and when he's there, he's distracted, barely present during conversations with Sarah and the kids. Sarah's no stranger to this side of Mark. She knows he's dedicated to his job and that stress from work can be overwhelming. But this feels different. There's a distance that wasn't there before, something she can't quite put her finger on. She's hoping it's temporary, just another stressful season. One evening, Mark's phone buzzes with a message from Claire. She's venting about a tough day, talking about a mistake she made at work and how she's worried it might affect her reputation. Mark could ignore it, keep it professional, but he finds himself texting back, offering support and encouragement. He tells her that everyone makes mistakes and that she's doing a great job. What starts as a simple text exchange soon evolves into a nightly ritual, with Mark and Claire messaging back and forth, talking about their day, sharing frustrations, even confiding in each other about things they don't share with anyone else. These conversations make Mark feel alive in a way he hasn't felt in years. For the first time in a long time, he feels understood, seen, like someone genuinely cares about what he has to say. With Claire, there's no pressure, no expectations. She listens to him without judgment, without assumptions. The connection is growing, and so is the guilt. He tells himself it's harmless, that as long as he doesn't cross a physical boundary, everything's fine. But there's a nagging voice in the back of his mind, warning him that this path only leads to trouble. At home, things are deteriorating. Sarah's patience is wearing thin. She's tired of the one-word answers, the blank stares, the empty seat at the dinner table. One evening, she confronts Mark, asking him point-blank if something's wrong. She's expecting him to say it's work stress, or that he's just tired, but he doesn't. Instead, Mark pulls away, avoiding her gaze. He mutters something about being overwhelmed, that he needs space, and heads to bed early, leaving Sarah alone in the kitchen, wondering where her husband has gone. Meanwhile, Mark and Claire's bond is deepening. They start meeting up outside of work more frequently, always under the guise of work-related discussions. But these meetings become longer, and the conversations become more personal. They go to lunch, sometimes take a coffee break together, and even meet up for another drink after work. Claire is also drawn to Mark's steady, dependable nature. She admires his dedication and sees him as someone who's been through it all, a mentor she respects but can't deny having feelings for. One day, as they're sitting together in a small cafe near their office, Claire confides in Mark about her last relationship, a serious one that ended badly. She talks about how she thought she'd found the one, but it didn't work out, and now she's unsure if she can ever trust anyone again. Mark listens intently, empathizing with her story, feeling an odd mix of protectiveness and attraction. He tells her about his marriage, too, carefully choosing his words, trying not to reveal too much, yet explaining how things have changed between him and Sarah. He admits that he feels distant, disconnected, and doesn't know how to fix it. Claire listens, sympathetic and understanding, offering a shoulder that feels comforting in a way he hasn't felt in a long time. As their relationship intensifies, Mark is caught between two worlds. He tries to balance his growing feelings for Claire with his sense of loyalty to Sarah, but it's getting harder by the day. He starts making excuses, telling Sarah he's got late meetings, or that he's swamped with a big project, all to buy himself time to see Claire. It's not long before Sarah's suspicions deepen. She begins to sense that something is off, noticing the small details Mark thinks he's hiding, the way he seems to check his phone more often, or how he suddenly has extra work events. Sarah decides to reach out to Mark's best friend, Tom. Tom has known Mark since college, and they've been through everything together. She shares her concerns, asking him if he's noticed anything strange. Tom's hesitant at first, unsure if it's his place to intervene, but he promises to check in on Mark, maybe pull him aside for a guy's night, and see if he can get him to open up. The tension comes to a head one night when Sarah confronts Mark again. She's done waiting, done hoping he'll explain what's been going on. She asks him directly if there's someone else, if he's been seeing another woman. Mark's caught off guard, and for a moment he considers telling her the truth, that he's been spending time with Claire, that he feels something he shouldn't. But fear wins out, and he denies it, brushing off her concerns as overthinking. He tells her she's imagining things, that he's just stressed from work, and that she needs to trust him. The lie sits heavy between them, a growing weight that neither of them knows how to lift. Sarah doesn't fully believe him, but she doesn't press further, hoping that maybe she's wrong, that things will go back to normal. Meanwhile, Mark's guilt is eating away at him. He knows he's lying to his wife, deceiving her every day, yet he can't seem to stop himself from seeing Claire. Their relationship finally crosses a line one evening. Mark and Claire are working late again, alone in the office with everyone else long gone. They're both exhausted, but there's an electric tension between them, one that's been building for weeks. As they're wrapping up, Mark reaches over to grab a folder, and their hands brush. For a moment, they lock eyes, and before either of them can think, they're leaning closer, the unspoken tension finally breaking. They kiss, a brief, intense moment that feels both thrilling and terrifying. They pull away, realizing what they've done, both of them looking shocked, caught in the reality of the moment. Mark stammers, trying to apologize, but Claire stops him, telling him she doesn't regret it. She admits that she's felt a connection with him from the beginning, and for once, Mark doesn't fight it. He lets himself feel what he's been holding back, and for that one moment it feels like nothing else matters. But reality hits fast. Mark knows that he's made a choice, one that's crossed a boundary he can never uncross. He's betrayed Sarah in a way that goes beyond a few late nights or secret texts. He's gone past the point of no return, and now, he's left with the consequences of his actions. As he drives home, the thrill fades, replaced by a hollow dread. He doesn't know how he's going to face Sarah, how he's going to live with himself now that he's crossed the line he swore he'd never cross. If you're finding yourself pulled into this story and want to see how it all unfolds, make sure to give this video a like, leave a comment, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Sharing this helps us create more stories like this, and your support means the world. Mark arrives home that night, feeling the weight of his choices pressing down on him. He slips quietly into bed beside Sarah, who stirs slightly but doesn't wake up. As he lies there, staring at the ceiling, he realizes he's trapped in his own web of lies. He doesn't know if there's a way out, or if he even wants one. As Mark lies awake beside Sarah, the gravity of what he's done starts to sink in. The kiss with Claire wasn't just a moment of weakness. It was a choice, a betrayal. He knows he can't keep going like this, balancing between two worlds. The guilt, the lies, and the constant sneaking around. It's all becoming too much to bear. But as much as he wants to put an end to it, he can't deny that there's something in Claire he doesn't want to let go of. The next day at work, he and Claire share a lingering look. Neither of them mentions the kiss, but it's there between them. An unspoken connection that feels impossible to ignore. Mark wants to tell her that they can't do this, that he has a family, a life, responsibilities. But when he's with her, all of those things seem distant, as if they belong to someone else. He knows he's standing at a crossroads, and whatever decision he makes will change everything. Later that day, Mark's best friend Tom calls him up, insisting on getting together for drinks. Mark suspects this isn't just a casual invite. Tom's been sensing something is off, and he's hoping that a little guy time might get Mark to open up. Reluctantly, Mark agrees, figuring that a night out with his oldest friend might help clear his head. He's been carrying all this guilt and confusion alone, and maybe, just maybe, talking it out with Tom could give him some perspective. At the bar, Tom doesn't waste time getting to the point. He asks Mark straight up if something's going on with him and Sarah. Mark tries to brush it off, saying he's just been stressed from work, but Tom doesn't buy it. He presses Mark, telling him he's not acting like himself and that Sarah's worried. Mark hesitates, knowing that if he opens up now, there's no going back. But he's exhausted from hiding, from pretending everything's fine when it's not. Finally, Mark confesses to Tom, though he keeps things vague, only admitting that he's been spending a lot of time with someone else. Tom's reaction is a mix of disappointment and concern. He warns Mark that he's walking a dangerous path, one that could destroy his family if he's not careful. Tom reminds him of the life he's built, the commitment he made to Sarah, and how much he stands to lose if he doesn't turn things around. Mark hears Tom's words, but they feel distant, almost unreal. He knows his friend is right, but he can't seem to let go of the feeling Claire gives him, that sense of being truly alive, seen, appreciated. As the night wears on, Mark leaves the bar feeling even more conflicted than before, torn between his obligations and his desires. Back at home, Sarah is waiting up for him. She's sitting on the couch, her arms crossed, her face a mix of worry and anger. She tells him that she knows something's wrong, that he's been distant and evasive, and she demands to know the truth. For a moment, Mark considers telling her everything, confessing to the emotional affair he's been having with Claire. But fear and guilt hold him back, and he finds himself lying again, telling Sarah that he's just overwhelmed with work. Sarah's not convinced. She's seen the changes in him, the way he avoids eye contact, the sudden late nights, the texts he tries to hide. She feels like she's losing him, and it's tearing her apart. She begs him to open up, to let her in, but Mark remains silent, unable to face the truth of what he's done. He watches her walk away, feeling the weight of his choices pressing down on him, knowing that every lie he tells is pushing her further away. The tension only escalates over the next few weeks. Mark is barely sleeping, caught in a spiral of guilt and longing. He can't seem to break away from Claire, yet every time he looks at Sarah, he feels a pang of regret, a reminder of the life he's risking. Sarah grows more distant, hurt by his lies and secrecy, yet still hoping that they can find a way back to each other. But with each passing day, the rift between them widens, as if they're standing on opposite sides of a canyon that only grows deeper. One evening, Mark and Claire are working late again. They're alone in the office, the lights dim, the silence heavy between them. Claire brings up the kiss, asking Mark if he regrets it. He doesn't answer right away, caught between his feelings for her and the reality of his marriage. Finally, he admits that he doesn't regret it, that he's been drawn to her from the start. The admission hangs in the air, charged with a mix of excitement and dread. They kiss again, this time more passionately, letting go of the restraint they'd been clinging to. For Mark, it feels like a release, a moment of freedom from the weight of his responsibilities. But as soon as it's over, reality comes crashing back. He knows he can't keep doing this, that every moment he spends with Claire is a betrayal of the life he's built with Sarah. But just as he's about to tell Claire they need to stop, she drops a bombshell. She confesses that she's fallen in love with him, that she can't imagine going back to the way things were before. Mark is stunned, caught off guard by the intensity of her feelings. He hadn't expected this, hadn't realized just how deep her attachment had grown. And as much as he wants to tell her that they can't be together, he finds himself unable to say the words. Their affair continues, growing more intense, more consuming. Mark is living a double life, caught between two worlds, unable to fully commit to either. At home, Sarah is reaching her breaking point. She knows there's something he's not telling her, and it's tearing her apart. She tries to talk to him, to reconnect, but every attempt is met with a wall of silence. She starts to feel like she's living with a stranger, someone who looks like her husband but isn't really there. One night, Sarah finally confronts Mark in a moment of raw desperation. She tells him she can't keep living like this, that if he doesn't open up, she's going to leave. Mark is stunned, realizing that he's pushed her to the edge, that his lies have driven her to a place he never wanted her to go. But even then, he can't bring himself to tell her the truth. Instead, he promises to try harder, to be more present, hoping it'll be enough to keep her from walking away. But the damage has been done. Sarah doesn't trust him anymore, and no amount of empty promises can fix that. She starts distancing herself, pulling away emotionally, preparing herself for the possibility that their marriage might be over. Mark feels the walls closing in, knowing that he's on the verge of losing everything, yet still unable to break free from the pull he feels toward Claire. The turning point comes one evening when Sarah finds a message on Mark's phone. It's from Claire, a simple message that reads, "I miss you." Sarah's heart sinks as she realizes the truth, that her worst fears have been confirmed, that Mark has been hiding an affair right under her nose. She feels a wave of anger, betrayal, and heartbreak, all crashing down on her at once. When Mark comes home, Sarah is waiting for him, holding his phone in her hand. She confronts him, demanding an explanation, but he can't find the words. He knows there's no excuse, no way to justify what he's done. All he can do is apologize, but even that feels hollow, empty. The damage is done, and there's no taking it back. Sarah tells him to leave, her voice trembling with a mix of anger and sorrow. Mark tries to plead with her, to explain that it was a mistake, that he still loves her, but she doesn't want to hear it. She tells him that their marriage is over, that she can't stay with someone who betrayed her so deeply. As Mark walks out of the house, he feels a crushing sense of loss, knowing that he's lost everything he once held dear. He realizes that his affair with Claire was never worth the cost, that he's destroyed his marriage, his family, and his own sense of self. He's left with nothing but regret, a hollow shell of the man he once was. As Mark walks away from the only life he's ever known, he feels the weight of his choices bearing down on him like never before. The realization that he's just destroyed his marriage, a life he spent years building with Sarah, crashes down on him with brutal clarity. He's left with nothing but the guilt of what he's done and the haunting sense that he's lost everything that truly mattered. For a few days, Mark stays with a friend, barely eating, barely sleeping. He's consumed by regret, replaying every moment with Sarah, every lie he told, every time he could have chosen differently. He wonders if he was always destined to ruin things, to let down the people who cared about him most. Claire, sensing that something is deeply wrong, tries to reach out to him, but he's distant, avoiding her texts, her calls, even blocking her number for a while. She's confused, hurt by his sudden withdrawal, but Mark can't bring himself to face her, to admit that she's part of the reason he lost his family. Meanwhile, Sarah is devastated. She spent years devoted to their marriage, trusting Mark, supporting him through everything, only to find out he betrayed her in the worst way possible. She's torn between anger and heartbreak, wondering if there was something she could have done to prevent this, if she somehow pushed him into someone else's arms. But as the days go by, she starts to realize that none of this was her fault, that Mark's choices were his alone. Sarah turns to her friends and family for support, confiding in them about the affair. She finds a surprising strength in their encouragement, realizing that she's not alone in this, that she has people who care about her and are willing to help her move forward. She starts to focus on herself, rediscovering the things she loves, the passions she put aside for the sake of their marriage. Slowly, she begins to rebuild her life, piece by piece, finding solace in the independence she'd forgotten she had. Back at work, Mark is barely functioning. His performance suffers, and he's constantly on edge, haunted by the memory of Sarah's devastated face the night she confronted him. His boss pulls him aside one day, telling him that he needs to get it together or risk losing his job. It's a wake-up call, a reminder that he's not just losing his family, but everything he's worked for. He realizes that he's on the verge of hitting rock bottom, that if he doesn't make a change, he could lose everything. In a moment of desperation, Mark decides to reach out to Sarah. He knows it's a long shot, but he's hoping she'll at least give him a chance to apologize, to try to make amends. He sends her a message, asking if they can meet, if she'd be willing to hear him out. To his surprise, Sarah agrees, though her response is curt and distant. She's not doing it for him. She's doing it for herself, to find closure, to understand why he threw away their life together. They meet at a quiet cafe, sitting across from each other in an uncomfortable silence. Mark can barely look at her, his guilt weighing heavily on him. He stumbles over his words, trying to explain himself, to apologize, but he knows there's nothing he can say to make things right. Sarah listens in silence, her face unreadable, until he finally finishes, his voice barely a whisper. After a long pause, Sarah tells him that she doesn't hate him, that she's not even angry anymore. She's disappointed, yes, but she's ready to move on, to leave the past behind. She tells him that she deserves better than someone who didn't value her, someone who couldn't be honest. Her words cut deep, a painful reminder of everything he's lost, but he knows she's right. There's a strength in her that he hadn't fully appreciated before, a resilience that's both humbling and heartbreaking. As they part ways, Mark realizes that this is truly the end, that there's no going back. Sarah is ready to move forward, to start a new chapter in her life, while he's left to pick up the pieces of his own shattered existence. He walks away from the cafe, feeling a mix of sorrow and a strange sense of relief. For the first time, he understands that he needs to let her go, to allow her the freedom to find happiness without him. In the weeks that follow, Mark tries to rebuild his life. He cuts ties with Claire completely, knowing that their relationship was never meant to last, that it was built on lies and deception. He focuses on his work, pouring his energy into projects, trying to regain the respect he lost. He starts going to therapy, hoping to understand why he made the choices he did, to figure out how he can become a better person, someone worthy of trust and respect. Sarah, meanwhile, is thriving. She's found a new sense of purpose, rediscovering her passions and building a support system of friends and family who lift her up. She starts to feel whole again, realizing that she doesn't need Mark to be happy, that she's capable of building a fulfilling life on her own. The pain is still there, but it's no longer a constant presence, just a faint reminder of a chapter she's ready to close. Mark's journey is far from over, but he's beginning to understand the importance of self-reflection, of learning from his mistakes. He knows he has a long way to go, but for the first time he feels a glimmer of hope, a sense that maybe, just maybe, he can find redemption. Mark tries to rebuild his life, yet every attempt to move forward is shadowed by his mistakes. The therapy sessions are hard but necessary, forcing him to confront the choices he made and the pain he caused. He begins to understand just how deep his betrayal went, not only toward Sarah but also toward himself. His therapist pushes him to dig deeper, to examine the reasons behind his need for validation from someone outside his marriage. Slowly, he begins to unravel the insecurities and unresolved issues that led him down this path. But understanding doesn't erase the regret. If anything, it only makes him more painfully aware of how much he's lost. Sarah, on the other hand, is finding her stride in her new life. She started attending a yoga class, meeting new people, and even reconnecting with old friends she'd lost touch with over the years. Her confidence is growing, and for the first time, she feels like she's in control of her own happiness. But while she's making strides, there's still a part of her that's healing from the betrayal, a wound that reopens every time she's reminded of the life she once shared with Mark. Then, just as things start to settle, Mark receives a message that throws him back into a whirlwind of emotions. It's from Claire, asking if they can talk. She tells him she's going through a tough time and could really use a friend. Despite everything, Mark feels a pull toward her, a sense of responsibility, maybe even a lingering attachment. But he knows that meeting her could set back all the progress he's made, that he's finally on a path to self-awareness and healing. He debates whether he should respond, torn between his desire to help and the need to protect himself from further pain. Against his better judgment, Mark decides to meet Claire. They agree to meet at a quiet park, away from the office and any prying eyes. When he sees her, he's struck by how different she looks. Tired, vulnerable, not the confident woman he remembers. She opens up about her own struggles, about how their relationship affected her in ways she didn't anticipate. She confesses that she thought she could handle it, that she knew what she was getting into, but in the end, she lost herself in the process. Hearing her words, Mark feels a pang of guilt, realizing that his choices hurt more than just his marriage. They affected Claire, too. The conversation is raw and emotional, with both of them admitting the mistakes they made and the regrets they carry. Mark tells Claire that he's committed to rebuilding his life, to being a better person, and that he can't go back to what they had. It's a painful moment, but he knows it's the right thing to do. Claire nods, understanding but visibly heartbroken. They part ways with a sense of closure, each of them accepting that their relationship was a mistake, a misstep on a path that was never meant to be. For Mark, the meeting with Claire feels like the final chapter closing on a dark period of his life. He returns to therapy with a renewed sense of purpose, determined to continue working on himself, even though the journey is far from over. His therapist challenges him to keep moving forward, to confront the fears and insecurities that led him astray. Mark starts to feel a sense of redemption, not in fixing the past but in creating a future where he's honest with himself and those around him. Meanwhile, Sarah is making her own strides in her personal growth. She's developed a newfound strength, learning to trust herself and her instincts again. Her friends and family notice the change in her, the resilience that's grown from her pain. And though she's still healing, she's beginning to open herself up to the idea of love again, realizing that she deserves happiness, even if it's not with Mark. One evening, as Sarah is preparing to attend a friend's party, she receives an unexpected knock at the door. It's Mark. He looks nervous, almost as if he's struggling to find the right words. He tells her that he's not here to ask for forgiveness or a second chance. He's here to say thank you. Thank you for the years they shared, for the love she gave him, and for being strong enough to walk away when he wasn't. Sarah listens, a mix of emotions washing over her. She doesn't respond right away, letting his words sink in. Finally, she thanks him, too, not for the pain he caused, but for forcing her to find herself again, to realize her own strength. They share a quiet, understanding smile, both of them aware that this is their final goodbye, a moment of peace that brings closure to the wounds they both carry. As Mark walks away from Sarah's house, he feels a sense of freedom, a weight lifted off his shoulders. He knows he has a long road ahead, but for the first time, he feels ready to face it alone, to take responsibility for his life and the choices he makes moving forward. After leaving Sarah's house, Mark walks away with a feeling of resolution, but the pain of his mistakes still lingers. Each step forward in his journey has come at a cost, and while he's beginning to understand himself better, the weight of what he's lost hangs heavily on him. The finality of his goodbye to Sarah is a turning point. He realizes that he's alone now, truly responsible for his own path. Mark dives deeper into therapy, determined to address the parts of himself he's kept buried for years. Through his sessions, he starts to confront the fears and insecurities that drove his need for validation and led him to betray Sarah. For the first time, he's honest with himself, facing the guilt and shame he's tried to avoid. These sessions become a painful but necessary journey of self-discovery, revealing the layers of resentment he had built up over time, toward his job, his life, and even his marriage. As he grapples with his own struggles, Sarah finds herself on a path of transformation as well. She's learning to trust again, but not in others, in herself. She starts focusing on the things that bring her joy, diving into hobbies she'd neglected and spending time with friends who uplift her. Her family notices her renewed energy and confidence, admiring the way she's taken control of her life. Even as she faces moments of sadness, memories of happier times with Mark, she feels stronger than ever, no longer defined by the betrayal that nearly broke her. But despite their progress in separate directions, both Mark and Sarah can't shake the feeling that their story isn't fully over. One evening, Mark receives a call from his best friend, Tom, who's been by his side throughout everything. Tom suggests that maybe it's time Mark makes one final attempt to talk things through with Sarah, not to rekindle their marriage but to gain closure for both of them. Mark knows it's risky, he doesn't want to open old wounds. But after careful consideration, he decides that he owes it to Sarah, and to himself, to have one last honest conversation. They agree to meet at a coffee shop, a quiet place that feels neutral, safe. As Mark arrives, he sees Sarah sitting by the window, looking out at the street. She's calm, collected, and when she sees him, there's no anger in her eyes, only a quiet understanding. They sit down, and after a moment of silence, Mark takes a deep breath and begins to speak. He apologizes again, but this time it's not just a surface-level apology. He tells her everything he's learned about himself, about the insecurities and fears that drove him to make such reckless choices. He admits that he was selfish, that he let his own feelings overshadow the love they once shared. He tells her that he's been working on himself, trying to become a better person, and that he's grateful for the time they had together, even though he knows he didn't treat it with the respect it deserved. Sarah listens, absorbing his words without interrupting. She can see the genuine remorse in his eyes, the depth of understanding he's gained. When he finishes, she thanks him, not for what he's done but for finally giving her the honesty she deserved all along. She tells him that she's forgiven him, not because what he did was okay but because holding on to the pain would only hurt her more. It's a moment of peace between them, a chance to let go of the bitterness and resentment they've both been carrying. They part ways with a sense of closure, knowing that their paths are now separate but feeling grateful for the growth that came from their pain. It's a bittersweet ending, filled with a sense of loss, but also with a newfound freedom for both of them to move forward. Mark walks away, feeling lighter than he has in months, ready to face the future on his own terms. As Mark leaves the coffee shop after his conversation with Sarah, a sense of peace settles over him, but it's fragile. He's gotten the closure he desperately needed, but he also knows that his journey is far from over. Every choice he's made has led him to this point, and the weight of his past still lingers. He's walking away from a life he once thought was permanent, now faced with the daunting task of finding himself on his own terms. However, life has a way of testing us, even when we think we're ready to move forward. Just as Mark starts to gain some footing, he gets an unexpected call from his therapist, who suggests a retreat focused on self-reflection and healing. Mark is hesitant at first, unsure if isolating himself is what he needs. But after reflecting on the chance to dig deeper into his feelings without the distractions of daily life, he decides to go. The retreat takes place at a quiet, secluded cabin in the mountains, surrounded by towering pine trees and clear, crisp air. The environment is serene, almost surreal, a stark contrast to the emotional chaos Mark has been dealing with. He's assigned to a small group of people, each with their own stories of loss, regret, and redemption. They spend the days in meditation, group therapy, and journaling exercises, all designed to help them confront their pasts and let go of lingering pain. In one of the group sessions, Mark is asked to share his story. He starts hesitantly, unsure if he can bear the vulnerability, but the supportive energy of the group gives him the courage to open up. He talks about his marriage, his mistakes, and the emotional betrayal that ultimately led to his downfall. As he speaks, he feels a flood of emotions rising within him: shame, regret, sorrow. But there's also a strange sense of relief, a feeling that, by speaking his truth out loud, he's finally letting go of the weight he's been carrying. The people in the group offer him compassion, not judgment. Some of them share their own stories of broken relationships and missed chances, creating a space where Mark feels understood in a way he hasn't felt before. For the first time, he realizes he's not alone in his mistakes, that others have also struggled, faltered, and found their way back. This shared vulnerability brings him a sense of healing, a reminder that redemption is possible, even for someone who's made as many mistakes as he has. But the real turning point comes during a solitary hike one morning. Mark sets off into the woods, following a narrow path that winds through the dense forest. The silence is overwhelming, broken only by the sound of his footsteps crunching on the fallen leaves. As he walks, he starts reflecting on his life, his choices, and the person he wants to become. He realizes that while he's taken steps toward healing, he's still been holding onto the past, unwilling to fully forgive himself. Suddenly, he reaches a clearing at the edge of a cliff, overlooking a vast valley below. The view is breathtaking, the kind of beauty that makes you feel small but also part of something much bigger. Standing there, surrounded by nature's vastness, Mark experiences a moment of clarity. He realizes that his mistakes don't define him, that while he can't undo the past, he has the power to shape his future. In that moment, he lets go of the guilt, the shame, the regret. It's not that he forgets what he's done, but he stops allowing it to control him. When he returns to the retreat cabin, there's a noticeable shift in his demeanor. He's more present, more at peace with himself. The people in his group sense it too, seeing a new lightness in him that wasn't there before. Over the next few days, he immerses himself in the exercises, engaging fully, no longer holding back out of fear or shame. He begins to feel a genuine sense of hope, a belief that he can build a life of meaning, even after everything he's lost. After the retreat ends, Mark returns home, but he's not the same man who left. He's more grounded, more self-aware, and more determined to live a life of honesty and purpose. He reaches out to Sarah one last time, not to ask for anything but to express his gratitude. He tells her about the retreat, about the lessons he's learned, and how he's finally come to terms with his mistakes. He wishes her happiness, genuinely hoping she finds someone who will cherish her the way she deserves. Sarah responds with kindness, acknowledging the growth she's seen in him, but making it clear that their paths are separate now. She's found her own sense of peace, and she's ready to embrace her future without the shadows of their past. It's a bittersweet moment, filled with a mix of nostalgia and hope, as they both come to terms with the end of their story. Mark spends the following months rebuilding his life, this time with intention. He finds fulfillment in his work again, throwing himself into projects that challenge him and give him a sense of accomplishment. He reconnects with old friends, the ones he pushed away during his affair, and begins to repair those relationships. Slowly, he starts to rebuild a support system, a community of people who genuinely care about him. He still thinks about Sarah from time to time, memories of their life together lingering in the back of his mind. But instead of feeling regret, he feels gratitude for the time they shared and for the lessons their relationship taught him. He knows he'll always carry a part of her with him, a reminder of the man he once was and the man he's striving to become. One evening, as he's sitting alone in his apartment, Mark reflects on the journey he's taken, the mistakes he's made, and the growth he's experienced. He realizes that while he's still a work in progress, he's finally on a path he can be proud of. He's learned to forgive himself, to let go of the past, and to embrace the future with an open heart. Mark's life has finally begun to stabilize. In the months following his retreat, he's grown into a version of himself that feels more whole, more grounded. He's found a balance between work, friendships, and his personal growth, crafting a life where he's truly accountable to himself. The chaos and turmoil of his past are now fading memories, replaced by a renewed sense of purpose. He's learned to let go of the guilt and shame he once clung to, understanding that moving forward means accepting both his mistakes and his progress. For Sarah, life has also blossomed in unexpected ways. She's thriving in her new independence, surrounded by a strong network of friends and family who support her wholeheartedly. Over time, she's opened herself up to new relationships and experiences, rediscovering what it means to feel joy and trust without the weight of past hurt holding her back. Her journey has led her to a place of fulfillment and resilience, and while she occasionally reflects on her past with Mark, she feels no regret, only gratitude for the lessons it taught her. One day, Mark receives a message from Sarah. It's simple, just a few lines saying she wanted to reach out to see how he's doing. She mentions that she recently ran into Tom, who told her about Mark's retreat and the changes he's made. She congratulates him on his progress and wishes him well on his continued journey. Mark reads the message with a soft smile, feeling a warmth that comes from knowing they're both at peace. He writes back, thanking her and wishing her the happiness she deserves. There's no longing in their exchange, just a shared understanding and respect for the separate paths they now walk. The final turning point in Mark's journey comes when he's invited to speak at a conference on personal growth and resilience, an invitation extended by his therapist, who sees how far he's come. Mark's initial reaction is hesitation. He's not sure if he's ready to share his story with strangers, to lay bare the mistakes he made and the lessons he learned. But after some reflection, he realizes that this opportunity is part of his growth, a chance to turn his experiences into something meaningful for others. Standing before the audience, Mark takes a deep breath and begins to speak. He tells his story with honesty and vulnerability, admitting his faults and the pain they caused. He talks about the choices he made, the people he hurt, and the long road he traveled to find forgiveness and self-respect. The audience listens in quiet empathy, and by the end, Mark feels an overwhelming sense of relief. He's transformed his pain into wisdom, and in doing so, he's found a way to give back, to help others avoid the path he once took. As he leaves the stage, Mark realizes that he's finally let go of the past. His mistakes no longer define him. They're simply parts of his journey, lessons that shaped him into the person he is today. He feels a quiet pride, a sense of fulfillment that he's been searching for all along. In the end, both Mark and Sarah have found peace, each of them moving forward with strength and resilience. They've let go of the pain, forgiven themselves and each other, and embraced the future with open hearts. Their story is a reminder that even the deepest wounds can heal, that personal growth often comes through hardship, and that sometimes, letting go is the first step toward true happiness. Thank you for watching this story unfold. If you enjoyed this recap, don't forget to hit the like button, leave a comment, and subscribe to the channel for more videos like this. Your support means a lot, and I look forward to sharing more stories with you soon.